could have been managed differently. And he conceded that because of what is happening globally. And that in itself demonstrated to me, as he himself conceded, that the timing could have been different, and that what he said in Iran really was an expression of the continued relations that have existed between our two countries. And in the end, the relations we have no impact whatsoever, and should have no impact with our relations with other countries. And we respect and deeply respect the relations that other countries have with whoever in the world. And similarly, we say the same should obtain with us. There was a time when we were lambasted for even having any relationship with Russia, as it was involved in a war with Iran. And now of late, Honorable Maimani, nearly everyone comes to us and says, could you kindly impart a message to President Putin? And these are largely countries that had decided to shun Russia, to boycott Russia, and never want to have any discussions with them. And we've often said, do continue engaging with Russia. I remember very well when I went to the White House and met President Biden. And I said, do not disengage from talking to Russia, even as there is a conflict. And he said, can you please pass on a message to Russia, because you have historically had a relationship with Russia, because he said himself, we know that Russia was one of the only countries that supported your struggle as you were involved in a gigantic struggle against apartheid. I said, yes, they did support us, and we've continued to engage with them. And our engagement with them does not result in the abandonment of our own principles. We have principles, and they deal with us with great respect, with great honor, knowing very well that we are a sovereign state and we will not abandon our principles whatsoever. And now, many of them are then calling us and saying, can you please pass on this message to President Putin about the Ukrainian war so that we can find settlement? And this is done by nearly all of them. And these are countries that criticized South Africa very harshly when the Ukraine-Russia war started. Now of late, they become converts. They now come to us and ask us to pass on messages and to see how best we can work for peace. Now, the position we've always had is that we, in pursuing peaceful outcomes, will talk to all parties. We will talk to those who are belligerents in any conflict, and we will adhere to our principles, and our principles are to make peace, to make sure that there is peace in the world and all conflicts are resolved peacefully. So our standing as a country has been greatly enhanced. Much as others say our standing has been dashed, it has actually been greatly enhanced, as many countries want to talk to us and see how best we can get involved in settling the variety of conflicts around the world. So the Iranian case is a case in point, and we've been very clear in our dealings that they are principled, and we will always adhere to our own principles and values and never abandon those. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. President. We are now moving to the second question, question 14, that has been asked by Honorable M. Ntuli. Honorable Ntuli, unfortunately, has a family engagement and is not here physically, and has asked Honorable Mpapane to take the question on his behalf. The question is considering his State of the Nation address on 9 February 2023, in which he emphasized the creation of a state bank, which entails licensing the Post Bank. What measures is the government taking to support the Post Bank in acquiring its full commercial banking license, and whether the government has established the need to capitalize the Post Bank to ensure its commercial viability? Honorable President.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Driving financial inclusion remains a national priority for us. When more South Africans, especially the South Africans who live in the rural areas and underserved communities, are able to access affordable banking and credit, we unlock entrepreneurship, support job creation, and stimulate growth in local communities. Now, financial inclusion also empowers youth and women-owned enterprises, but it also narrows inequality and builds resilience in households and communities as well. South Africa has a well-developed and competitive financial services sector, and in fact, one can say almost second to none on our continent. And it is one of those great attributes that investors also look out for to distinguish our market from many others. Our commercial banks, development finance institutions, cooperative banks, and new digital entrants all provide a range of financial products and services to small businesses and individuals. But of course, we want much, much more access by our people, particularly your small, medium enterprises, to have easy access to finance from these institutions. The Post Bank Amendment Act was enacted to strengthen the diversity of our financial sector and to ensure a dedicated focus on underserved communities. The Act was meant to establish a Post Bank as a developmental state-owned commercial bank, offering accessible financial services to all South Africans, but more particularly to South Africans who live in the rural areas. Whilst obtaining a banking license is an independent regulatory process, the Minister of Communications and Digital Technologies, as the representative shareholder and executive authority of the Post Bank on behalf of our government, is tasked with ensuring that the Post Bank receives the necessary support to obtain the banking license. Now, according to the Minister, the Post Bank has not yet fully met the conditions for a banking license, particularly around its card key management processes and the compliance with the prudential standards that are required. Its immediate challenge is to strengthen its governance to ensure compliance with prudential standards and to stabilize its own finances. Capitalization of the bank will be considered, as it must, once the Post Bank is granted authorization to operate as a bank, after which it has 12 months to raise the funding to become a registered bank. This will be determined by its business case, for which the Post Bank Board is responsible, and submitting the business case to government via the Minister of Communications and Digital Technologies. Now, these steps, Madam Speaker, are essential to ensure that the Post Bank obtains its banking license and is able to fulfill the vital mandate that it bears to promote financial inclusion for all. Now, I am sure and certain that these requirements should be met and will be met. And all that we need to focus on is the time frame through which the bank itself will be able to meet all these requirements. Now, I know that the board is at work to address all these matters. And as it is a financial services institution, the requirements are quite stringent. They are stringent because the Prudential Authority wants to protect the public when it comes to their money. And so therefore, those standards have been well set out, and it is now incumbent on the minister as well as on the bank to ensure that they meet all these standards. And once these standards are met, then the bank will be able to offer all the services as a registered entity. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. President. Honorable D. Mpapane.
Thank you very much, Honorable President, for the comprehensive response to this question. One of the measures that has enabled the Post Bank to obtain exemption in terms of the Banks Act to implement its commercial strategy and ensure its viability in the interim is the Master's Service Agreement with SASSA for the payment of social and SRD grants to beneficiaries. The Department of Social Development and SASSA has indicated that they will terminate the MSA agreement. The effect of losing the master service agreement with SASSA could place the bank at risk of insolvency and possibly going under liquidation, which could see the bank retrenching over 250 employees and not obtaining its full commercial license. What is government doing to avert the risks that are associated with this, with the termination of this agreement? Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable President.
Now, according to SASSA, the agreement it had with the Post Bank no longer serves any purpose. And that is why that agreement is to be terminated. It is said that since the termination of cash pay points and other over-the-counter services at the post office, and the removal of the post office as a recognized grant payment channel, the agreement is no longer relevant. The department is, however, in discussions, and this has involved a multi-departmental type of discussion to try and forestall this whole fallout. In the end, your SASSA beneficiaries will not be affected because they will continue with their own accounts. But the operation of the post office itself is what is currently under discussion to ensure that we forestall the total collapse of the post office. Now, indeed, the Post Bank has to meet a number of requirements, and we have said that these should be met on an urgent basis so that we can see how best we begin to address the whole issue of capitalization. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Maudre.
I will take the question. Thank you very much, Speaker. President, in terms of the statement released by the South African Reserve Bank on the 25th August, we know that the Post Bank is still a designated clearing system participant and not a fully fledged bank. Yes, we've heard you that we're in the process of establishing it as a fully fledged bank. But in 2018, we introduced a bank amendment bill in terms of which we proposed that the bank should be a fully fledged state bank. Further, we proposed that the public service bank be established using the asset base of the African Bank, which is largely owned by the South African Reserve Bank and the GEPF. While your party rejected the bill back then, and given your belated delays of the state bank, would you be in support of the sort of the interventions we proposed in the bank's amendment bill today in order to boost the capacity of the state to facilitate ease of banking and give it trust for the state-led banking services that prioritize development? Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable President.
Thank you. The issue of a state bank has been a topic of great discussion amongst all of us. And there is general agreement that there should be a state bank. The whole question is really how do we then move forward to put it together? And how do we put all the key elements, whether they reside in the Post Bank or whether the African Bank could be part of them. And we should remember that the African Bank has other shareholders who are not state entity parties, who are like the commercial banks. So all those entities now need to be properly synchronized to ensure that we do utilize whatever assets that there are to create a state bank. I do think that we have moved quite considerably closer to what we could finally emerge as a state bank. Of course, the key question is going to be capitalization, and if current assets that reside elsewhere can be put together and with whatever input the government can make to set up a state bank, that will be the ideal outcome. So in the end, I do believe that a state bank is no longer a question of whether it will be set up or not. It is really the mechanics of how we go about setting up the state bank. That it will be done, in my view, is a foregone conclusion. It will be done. How we go about it and how quickly we move to set it up is the critical question. And it is a question that I believe is being addressed both by Treasury, by the central bank, and also a number of other entities as well as ministries. So a state bank is something that is going to happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Honorable MC Mafakane.
Mr. President, Post Bank requires about 7 billion to recapitalize and has no intention to privatize. It has gone 3 times to the National Treasury for help to capitalize. These requests were rejected. Considering that ministers sign performance agreements and are accountable to you, Mr. President, does your failure to ensure the capitalization of Post Bank represents a failure to anticipate at the signing into the law, the state bank, the risk factor associated with the viability of the state bank? When this decision, like many others, is not implemented, will you say that you are shocked and call for the citizens to provide an answer and solution as you normally do?
Thank you, Honorable President.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I like your laughter on this. You know, when somebody laughs the way you are laughing, they know they are not telling the truth. But let me answer you directly. I am not shocked. Point number 1, I am not shocked. Point number 2, I am not asking South Africans to provide the answer. Now, once we've cleared those 2 questions, I should say that capitalization of the Post Bank is something that needs to be handled with the necessary care. Firstly, the fiscal challenges that we face are enormous. We don't have easy money lying around, but at the same time, what I said in my reply.
Honorable Klute, can you please switch off your mic?
What I said in my reply in chief was that there are quite a number of conditions that have to be met. Now, I should say that the progress that is being made in moving towards getting the post bank to become a properly registered bank is actually quite encouraging, because now there's a clear roadmap. And the roadmap is, from a governance point of view, the board must ensure that everything is well aligned, themselves as the people who are responsible for governance. And at the same time, they need to look at the financial viability of the bank itself. And once all that has been done, we will then be able to move to the whole question of capitalization, and then determine how that capitalization should happen. And it is then that the minister will come to this house and propose a capitalization amount and where the money should come from. That we want to move towards setting up the post bank as a registered bank is a given. And all we need to do is to ensure that all these other matters that are regulatory, that have to do with governance, and that have to do with financial prudency are all attended to. Remembering that the post bank in the end is going to be managing public money. And we therefore ourselves need to be absolutely certain that this bank will operate in terms of the laws, in terms of the regulations that we have that govern banking in South Africa. So I do hope and I do believe that that will happen. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Thank you, President. Honorable Abrams.
Mr. President, last year the Post Bank was looted of 100 million rand of taxpayers' money. This after the Reserve Bank repeatedly warned of security vulnerabilities. This perpetuates the trust deficit between South Africans and government. Can the President tell South Africans why a state-owned bank will not become yet another VBS looting scheme? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President.
The VBS saga has taught us a lot of lessons. There's a great desire amongst South Africans to have a state-owned financial services. And we know that those state-owned financial services will operate with a greater sensitivity to serve the interests of South Africans from a financial point of view. But at the same time, those entities need to operate in accordance with our very stringent financial regulatory framework. And the VBS, as you might recall, was not yet a registered financial institution. And that is why the type of mishap happened in the VBS. What we are seeking to do now is to forestall, to make sure that what happened, for instance, in VBS does not happen. And sometimes it becomes very frustrating for many of us that the government is not moving forward to set up these entities. And the frustration is something I can understand, but we must also understand that we've got to be absolutely careful, because this is about managing public money. If you talk to any banker today, they will tell you that the regulatory framework in which they have to operate is governed by so many laws that keep them straight on the narrow path, that make them be very careful in managing the money that comes from the public. So the assurances that one can give would be adherence to regulations and to the watchful eye of the Prudential Authority, which is part of the South African Reserve Bank, who watch every bank so closely. And they watch it so closely to a point where no one can serve as a director of a bank without being approved by the Reserve Bank. And the whole process of scrutiny, of ensuring that everybody who serves on a bank is a proper person, is quite stringent. And we need to thank them for that. And that is why our financial services architecture is so well respected in the world. So when the Post Bank finally gets that license, it will join that league of well-regulated bodies and well-managed bodies to ensure that things like fraud and the disappearance of money does not happen willy-nilly. So we should trust our regulatory framework and know that once we accede to that level of approval, a lot will be much better and safer. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Thank you, President. We now move to the third question, coming from Honorable G. Bichalakis, the Chief Whip of the DA. The question is about whether the National Dialogue is intended to assist the government to achieve its priorities of economic growth, poverty reduction, job creation, lowering the cost of living, and building a capable state. If not, what is the position in this regard? If so, what are the relevant details? Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. The outcomes of the National Dialogue will in the end be determined by the citizens of our country. They are not going to be determined by the President, nor any one of us sitting here. National Dialogue should be seen as a structured process where the citizens of our country, together with political actors, civil society, and other stakeholders, come together to deliberate on the future of their own country, to debate on the South Africa they want. Its importance, therefore, lies in several interconnected dimensions. The National Dialogue is aimed at giving ordinary South Africans a voice to articulate precisely the South Africa that they wish to have and how they participate in crafting the solutions for the country. Now, crafting the solutions sometimes is seen as privy for the leadership. And that is why when I addressed the National Dialogue, I asked the people of South Africa a number of questions that they should also participate in answering. And a wave of criticism has come my way when I sought to elicit real participation so that as South Africans, we must ask ourselves those very important questions. And we must, yes, as ordinary South Africans must ask, why does the tap not have water? They must ask us as their public representatives because the taps don't have water in many places. And they must, they must then say, you know,
Order, honorable members.
the taps don't have water because there is either corruption, there are water tanks, and we see it in our own communities, and be able to point out exactly what is happening on the ground themselves. Now, that is the opportunity that South Africans are going to be having or given to address these issues. Now, over the next few months, South Africans from across the length and the breadth of the country will be engaging in conversations on the issues that concern them deeply. The First National Convention which was held from the 15th to the 16th of August at UNISA, was attended by over 1,000 delegates representing more than 200 organizations. Now, that was quite a crowd of people, not Mickey Mouse at all. The convention brought together around 30 different sectors in society, ranging from business to labor to traditional leaders and faith-based organizations. There were organizations of women, youth, students, academics, emerging businesses and older persons, military veterans, persons with disabilities, and unemployed persons.
Order, Mr. President, if you can take a seat. Advise there's the question on the platform. Honorable Skosana, what is your question?
Ngiyabonga kakhulu Benisihlalo somlomo.
Is it a point of order?
Ngithi ke a point of order, the president is misleading the house.
Honorable member, under which rule are you raising your point of order?
Rule number 85.
No, honorable member. Can you please close your mic so that we can continue? Thank you, Honorable President.
I was enjoying the rest. Honorable Speaker, also among the represented organizations were people in the media, in sports, arts and culture, justice, peace, governance, democracy, and human rights. That was the collection of people who were at the National Convention. In many ways, the National Convention reflected the broad and vibrant diversity of our society. Whether people like it or not, that was the reality that was represented at the National Dialogue, at the convention rather. The first convention was a great success by any count, where delegates endorsed the need for the value of a national dialogue. The convention agreed on key themes for the national dialogue, understanding that citizens will be able to raise any issues that they want. The 9 broad themes that were identified were building a dynamic, inclusive economy that will create jobs and improve livelihoods, tackling crime and corruption, winning the future through education and a healthy nation, fixing the state and making the constitution work for our people, building South African values, culture, and strengthening our social fabric, advancing gender equality and ending gender-based violence and femicide, dealing with intergenerational trauma and healing, promoting environmental justice, advancing land and mineral rights. Now, delegates to the first National Convention expressed their support for a representative steering committee to drive the national dialogue process. Now, over the next 3 weeks, organizations involved in the 32 identified sectors have been meeting amongst themselves to nominate their own representatives to the steering committee. Now, these nominations will now be compiled and collated by the Eminent Persons Group to ensure inclusivity and representativity before the steering committee is constituted. Once established, the steering committee will work together with the Interministerial Committee, chaired by the Deputy President and with the advice of the Eminent Persons Group, to coordinate public dialogues across the country. And let us be clear, the steering committee will be led by the citizens of our country, giving credence to our intention that this must be citizen-led, whilst government's role is that only of a facilitator. The purpose of the dialogue that will take place at local level and within various sectors is to develop sustainable and effective responses to the challenges that the country faces. It is expected that this process will result in the social compact that we all yearn for, that outlines the roles, the responsibilities of each sector of society in building the South African nation. Now, while South Africans still have to have their say, it can be anticipated that the national dialogue will make a significant contribution to economic growth, to poverty reduction, to job creation, lowering the cost of living, and building a capable state, the very priorities that we outlined over and over again in this House. Now, citizens feel ownership over national decisions when they are directly themselves involved in shaping them, complementing the important role that is played by elected representatives. Involving the people directly enhances the process of developing a shared vision for the country of our future. Now, what happened? What happened when the National Convention was held was quite a moving process where we had so many South Africans expressing a deep yearning to be in conversation with each other. And it is something that we should never dismiss out of hand. And it is not something that can be called a misnomer. It is something that happened, and that is going to lead to the holding of a national dialogue through the length and the breadth of the country. And if one just looks at the number of organizations that were represented, they represent the entirety of our society in South Africa, of our citizenry. So let us give this whole process a chance, an opportunity to progress, rather than stand on the sidelines and criticize. And as they say, it's better to be inside the tent rather than to be outside and doing something inside the tent. So let us all be in this national dialogue tent. It is almost like a caravan. It is moving. And we call on everyone to be part of it. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Thank you, President. Honorable Michalakis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Mr. President, the national dialogue is a failure no matter how you sell it. Now, listen, the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, Steve Biko Foundation, Chief Albert Luthuli Foundation, Desmond and Leah Tutu Foundation, F.W. de Klerk Foundation, Oliver and Adelaide Tambo Foundation, and the Strategic Dialogue Group, and many others withdrew. Mr. President, how do you plan to get the entire country behind what results from it if you couldn't even get the entire country in the room to begin with?
Thank you, Honorable President.
Now, I do not want to get into the politics of who withdrew and who stayed in, because if I get involved in that, and let me just say this is not the president's dialogue. The people of South Africa called for the dialogue. And then they said it has to be convened for the first meeting by the president, because embedded in our constitution, there is that notion that when we talk about nation building, it is the president who should lead the process. Now, as often happens.
Order, honorable members, can we lower our voices?
Now, as often happens, and you're talking here to somebody who was unfortunately involved in a number of other dialogues. You know, we had the peace process in our country, when the country was dogged with a lot of violence. A number of South Africans got together and said we should have a peace summit. And when that was held, a number of other people did not participate. But a peace pact was framed, and it helped to bring down the levels of violence in the country. When we were moving forward to democratize our country, I remember very clearly we held a convention for a democratic future, which brought together a number of organizations. Many others did not participate. That convention for a democratic future helped to craft the path towards negotiations. When the multi-party negotiations happened, starting with CODESA, a number of other entities that did not participate, but it still resulted in the caravan moving forward. When the multi-party negotiations happened for a new constitution, a number of parties did not participate. And these were parties of great weight, of real big influence. They didn't participate, but the caravan moved on and finally produced the constitution that we now have. And the process of drafting that constitution was so broad and so inclusive. The drafters went throughout the country to involve a number of South African citizens. So it often happens, we're experienced with this, that when national processes happen, there will be those who will decry that they have not been included, and there will be those who say this is irrelevant, and there will be those who say we don't want to participate. But the majority always participate, and they move the process forward. So in this case, I am hopeful, much as, truth be told, much as I now have nothing to do with the dialogue, because the dialogue is now being led by a steering committee of which I am not a member. This dialogue is now going to be taken forward by those people who believe that this process should be theirs. And all we will do as government will play a supportive role of financing their various activities. And in many ways, that caravan is going to move on, whether people like it or not. And those who may have an inclination to now want to be part of it and join in, I'm told that they will always find the door open. And the caravan will stop for a while to allow them to climb on, and then it will continue moving on. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable President. Honorable members on the virtual platform, really, please help us to make sure that we move with the process of the question and not disadvantage other members who still have their questions. And I think it is important that we note that let's not be disruptive. Can I ask Honorable Ismail Musa? Order, honorable members.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. His Excellency, the Honorable President Cyril Ramaphosa, thank you so much for the opportunity. Considering the widespread public perception of a lack of trust at grassroots level in government, and noting that NGOs and civil society organizations are playing a pivotal role in supporting communities where government capacity falls short, it is concerning that their pivotal role was not adequately prior engaged, recognized, or included in the national dialogue. So may I ask you, Honorable President, does the national dialogue intend to broaden its engagements to meaningfully include grassroots and civil society organizations at its top structures so that the process is more adequately and genuinely people-driven. In the interest of our South African citizens, given the urgent realities faced by millions of South Africans...
Thank you. Your time is up, Honourable Member. I'm sure the President had picked up at least one question that you asked. Honourable President.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. As I am no longer involved in the whole process of the national dialogue, I'm told that one of the key principles that the National Dialogue Steering Committee will seek to adhere to is inclusivity, to make sure that as many organizations as possible at grassroots level, the rural areas and the urban areas, that will be organized according to sectors, do participate. And already I'm told that those sectors are meeting as we speak. They are finalizing as sectors their own representatives, be it in the sporting fraternity and even its subsectors. It could be rugby, it could be football, it could be tennis, it could be whatever, and various others. It could be traditional leaders, it could be all other sectors. It could be medical, it could be legal. They will all be meeting right now and identifying those who can be selected to come onto the steering committee. I do believe that it might well be a fairly large steering committee that will seek to be representative of the people of South Africa, of various sectors to which our people coalesce around. So the fear that others will be excluded should really be waylaid, because in the end, we want this dialogue process to be as inclusive as possible, and it must be people-driven. It must be driven right from the grassroots level. And people must be able to speak out their own minds. I envisage that in the end, we will have even, and this is what I am going to be calling for and encouraging, that we should even have at universities level, at school level, national dialogue days where young people come together and discuss precisely what South Africa they want to inherit going forward. They themselves must have those types of discussions. And I do believe that the steering committee will organize that so that there should be a day in which people collectively throughout the country get together and have a discussion. We should have school governing bodies getting together as well and talking about the type of education system they want to see. And all this, including the questions that I raised, are matters that South Africans should be talking about and should be crafting solutions around. It must be a people-driven process, not a top-down type of process. It must be from bottom right to the top. That is how inclusivity in the end will be achieved. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable President. Honorable Reverend Misha.
Thank you, Speaker. Dumela Presidente. It is concerning that calls for the postponement of the national dialogue made by the 7 legacy foundations who ultimately withdrew from the National Convention Task Team have gone unheeded. The foundations raised concerns that core principles of the dialogue have been violated, yet these concerns have not been addressed. They cited the erosion of citizens' leadership, a lack of financial and operational infrastructure, and the absence of an approved budget allocation as some of the reasons for their withdrawal. If the running of the national dialogue is to be transparent, as transparency was initially one of the core principles, which line items were removed from the planned expenditure that enabled the initial cost of the national dialogue to be cut from 700 million rands to the estimated 441 million rands. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. The decision to go ahead with the national dialogue and the decision for me to, as it was planned, to convene it was a collective decision. It was not one person's decision. It was a decision that was taken collectively with the eminent persons group and those who were involved initially from the organizing, the tasked team, who now mutated to become the organizing committee. Now, the issues that were raised were, we are not quite ready. The documentation has not yet been properly printed, and we don't know how the finances will be managed and all that. So those were the reasons. And the counter reasons that were then put forward is that the invitations have already gone out. Various organizations are responding. There are going to be more than 1,000 people who are coming. Arrangements have already been made. Bookings have already been done for transport, for accommodation, and what have you. The preparations for documentation can be solved fairly quickly. The issue of the budget was not really the key issue in the end. The key issue for me, and I must put my hand in this, was that the budget that had been drafted was 740 million. And I said, what will we be doing with 740 million? And it came out that some of the money would be utilized for booking people in expensive accommodation, booking meeting halls. And I said, but is that really necessary? When our people meet at ward level, they will always find places to meet, like we do with our Stockfells, with our prayer groups, with our whatever. People always find places on a free basis to meet. Why do we budget so much money for holding of such manifestations? And I then directed that that budget should be brought down substantially. Even on the National Convention, when I looked at the budget, and I do look at these things, when I looked at the budget and found that the charging for the hotel and all that were so high, I said, no, we are government. As government, we operate on economies of scale. We can bring prices down, go back and ask for bigger discounts. This is precisely what they did. And it did bring that budget down. Now, the good thing was that the finances are being managed by NEDLEC. Treasury allocates money to NEDLEC. NEDLEC, which is a state organization, manages that, and it plays the role of the secretariat. And that, for me, is very comforting, to ensure that what people feared, that money will disappear, should, to a large extent, be curtailed, and that we should keep a hawk's eye on how the money is utilized. Now, those were some of the concerns, but in the end, Honorable Mishwe, the decision that was taken was a collective one, that we go at. If we stop having invited people, it might be very difficult 2, 3, 4 months later to bring them in. The principle of getting this to be a people-oriented process is not true. It's very false. Because in the end, Reverend Misha, if you were there, the whole dialogue, the whole convention was being run not by a single government person. It was being run by civil society, people from organizations. And I kept asking, who is this one? Who is this one? Because I didn't know them. And to me, that was a joy that we've got people who are not the known names who are running. The deputy president was not the chairperson of the dialogue. And we had no minister who was the chairperson of the dialogue. It was ordinary South Africans. And that whole process is now going to be transposed to how it happens at the local level. And I have insisted that from government point of view, it must be hands-off. Hands-off. The only time we will need to get involved is to delineate the money and to make sure that the money process is being well handled through NEDLEC. So government hands-off, our people are in charge, and I trust our people to deliver the product that the people of South Africa need. And that is why the dialogue then went on. And let me add, Reverend Mishwe, the eminent persons group delegation was there. Most of them were there. Bishop Lekhanyane was there. He sat throughout the process. And the various other leaders of the EPG, they were there. And they were overseeing and also hands-off as it was being directed by ordinary people. So I derived a lot of joy, and I'm waiting for the report that you too will get. So key hands-off government, key hands-on our people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President. Honorable Dr. C.P. Mulder.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable President, I will want to make 3 quick points and then a question. The first point I would like to make is you refer to the questions that you've asked during the convention. And I think South Africans did not ask the questions because they know the answers. They expected the president to reply and to say why these things are there and why they were not differently. The second point I would like to make is I think it's common cause that the majority of South Africans were not represented. If you purely look at the parties represented in Parliament who did not participate in terms of their support, it's quite clear, never mind trade unions, that the majority were not represented. And lastly, the problem with regard to the outcomes that you referred to, I'm not aware that any decisions were taken at the convention. My question is the following. The original question dealt with possible outcomes, and it referred specifically to economic growth, job creation, etc. And we have had some interaction.
Thank you, Honorable Mulder. Your time is up.
The question I would like to ask is this. You've made it very clear on behalf of the presidency, but also your
Honorable Mulder,
that you are not going to support those kind of amendments. If the dialogue comes out and says these things should be done, will your government implement those changes?
Honorable Mulder, we didn't hear most of your questions.
Madam, I switched off my mic a long time ago.
IT, can you please switch off Honorable Mulder?
I have switched off.
Mr. President, you can answer a question you had because it was very difficult.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. It was very difficult to hear, and whatever I might answer might not entirely answer the questions that he might have had. But to the extent that I had, Honorable Mulder seems to be saying that the majority of parties represented in Parliament are not participating in the dialogue. That may well be so, but there are some parties that are in parliament that are represented in the whole process of the national dialogue. And as I said earlier, at times when we hold national manifestations, there are those who choose not to participate. And I think, past just begging them to participate, we can never, as the English say, take a horse to the river and force it to drink. And I'm expecting that with time, as they see this process unfolding, they may well want to participate. But in the end, the value of South Africans talking to each other, and let me be clear, let me be very clear, it is South Africans who will be talking to each other, meeting at ward level, where even our voters, the people who voted for us, are represented. So they will be talking. And they will not even be, cajoled not to talk. They will opt to go to those meetings and participate. So it is to the detriment of us who are sitting here to say, no, we are not going to participate because of this and this and that. I often, and I referred to this with regard to the Pan-Africanist Congress. Their message to me was quite heartwarming because the president of their Pan-Africanist Congress came to me and said, Mr. President, we as the PAC have always shunned and stayed away from various national manifestations. And we now realize that with our absence, our voice was not heard. And now we want to be there because we want our voice as the PAC to be heard. And I took that to heart and I said, that is precisely what the South African response should be, that we should participate. Because you know what? Your own members, your own voters are going to participate at grassroots level. They are going to go to those ward meetings. Unless, of course, as a party, you issue a directive that do not participate. And maybe all you should ever say is that if you see the president in any of those, don't go. I promise you, I'm not going to be there, so they should go. So I do hope that various parties will find their way clear, and those who are staying out will find their way clear to participate. This is a serious citizen-led process. Our people want to participate. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. President. The next question is question 16 and has been asked by the Honourable Modise Mpeya. The question is, given that the Republic is preparing for the G20 summit in November 2025 in Johannesburg, what has the assessment so far of South Africa's, what has been the assessment so far of South Africa's G20 presidency in line with the theme of solidarity, equity and sustainability? Mr. President, before you proceed, Honourable Skosana, was that a point of order?
No, it's a point of privilege.
No. Honourable Skosana, we are now busy with the questions. Honourable President, please proceed.
Honourable Deputy Speaker, South Africa's G20 presidency under the theme Solidarity, Equality and Sustainability has received strong support from G20 members, also strong support from invited countries that are not members of the G20, whom we have chosen to invite, particularly those who are on our continent and immediate neighbors to us, as well as receiving great support from international organizations. South Africa's G20 presidency has entered its final 90 days. Approximately 87 of the 132 official meetings on the G20 calendar have already taken place. You might have seen some of these meetings taking place in various parts of our country, and I must immediately say that they've all been well organized, well run, and in this regard, we really thank our provinces. Our provinces have come out in the strongest way to be hosts of these various G20 meetings that have been held from as far afield to the Kruger National Park, to the Eastern Cape, Northwest, all over, in fact, all over the country, these meetings have taken place. So we thank also the people of South Africa for being great hosts themselves, because they have, in a number of ways, interfaced with the G20 colleagues who have come to our shores. And a number of these meetings have resulted in people who didn't know our country falling in love with our country and saying they will return on holiday and they will come and see our country more closely. Now, these meetings address some of the most urgent and significant challenges facing the global community, demonstrating our firm commitment to finding sustainable and innovative solutions through dialogue, through collaboration, and through cooperation as well. The ongoing G20 discussions aim to advance, in the end, South Africa's overarching priorities. Now, these priorities are to strengthen disaster resilience and response, and we chose this because of the experience that we keep on having with regard to disasters. Year in and year out, 3 of our provinces continue to be befallen by terrible disasters that damage infrastructure, damage living abodes, and leading to loss of life and loss of assets and loss of livelihoods. And we want the G20 to address this. We also have wanted the G20 to address debt sustainability for low-income countries. Many of the low-income countries in the world suffer under the burden of heavy debt. And we wanted to mobilize finance for a just energy transition, and also to harness critical minerals for inclusive growth and sustainable development. Those have been our clear objectives under the rubric of the themes that we have chosen: equality, sustainability, and solidarity. And for us to bring to the fore the concept of solidarity has been very important, particularly in the light of what is happening in the world. We are calling for solidarity, and it has demonstrated its sharp end through a number of countries now coming to the fore on a matter where we were so heavily criticized when we chose to support the struggle of the Palestinians, and where we said we are going to support them. We will, yes, take another country to the ICJ to stop, underline, to stop the atrocities that are happening there. A number of countries are now coming forward to express solidarity, and in many ways inspired by the position that we took, that solidarity is still an important value in the world, that we need to pledge solidarity with those who are suffering and those who are being horribly treated. So we are rather pleased that much as our theme was so heavily criticized, particularly from the global north, when they said a theme like diversity, inclusivity, and equality and equity should not even see the light of day in, say, the G20. We've forged ahead, and it's now being broadly accepted. South Africa is also championing broader and cross-cutting issues on all G20 working groups. Now, these include reform of the multilateral trading system, and the international financing architecture, including strengthening of multinational development banks. While there is divergence on some issues, as is expected in multilateral engagements, there is support and strong support for that matter for South Africa's priorities among G20 members. Negotiations on the G20 Working Group ministerial declarations and outcomes are currently underway. You will recall that at the end of the G20, we need to have a declaration which in the main will be drafted by all participants, a declaration which South Africa is going to pilot to ensure that South African G20 declaration becomes the accepted outcome that will unite the world or the G20. Most of the last round of ministerial meetings will be held in September and October, ahead of the Leaders' Summit, which will be held in November. Now, significant progress has been made, and a milestone was achieved with the holding of the third meeting of the G20 finance ministers and central bank governors in July 2025. Remembering that the G20 process really got started to address the financial crisis that the world faced some years ago. The meeting outcomes were agreed in a communique consented to by all parties. The meeting delivered productive and constructive discussions on Africa, the global economic outlook and the macroeconomic stability, the international financial architecture, sustainable finance and global health, infrastructure, tax, financial sector issues, and financial inclusion. Now, these to us were a milestone because to have gotten the ministerial meeting, which involved the Reserve Bank governors and ministers of Treasury, to finally reach consensus and all this was really, in my view, the heart of what the G20 South Africa is going to mean. On the 29th of August, we launched the G20 Extraordinary Committee of Independent Experts on Global Wealth Inequality. And this was a South African initiative. The panel is being chaired by the Nobel laureate, Professor Joseph Stiglitz. This initiative seeks to heighten global attention on inequality and outline practical action to address growing disparities in income, wealth, and opportunity. Our former Minister of Trade, Industry, and Competition, former Minister Ibrahim Patel, is going to Washington just a day from now to go and interact with Professor Joseph Stiglitz on precisely the issues that we've asked him to chair our committee on. The outcomes of the G20 ministerial meetings will form a key part of the G20 Leaders' Declaration, which will be adopted at the G20 summit in Johannesburg in November. South Africa aims to produce an ambitious Leaders' Declaration that will promote the development agenda of the Global South in general and the African continent in particular. So all in all, Madam Deputy Speaker, a great deal has been achieved. We are way beyond the halfway mark. We are now on the final stretch of the G20 South Africa's presidency. And so far, it's been really good. The discussions have been rich, they've been robust, and they've been well organized, which in many ways is a great feather on the hat of South Africa, that we've been able to hold these meetings without too much angst, without too much differences, but getting various countries to coalesce. Even those countries that initially boycotted some of the meetings, and this is the thing about boycotting meetings, even those that boycotted, they found that the meetings continue. The caravan moves on. The caravan did not stop. And when they wanted to come and attend, the caravan was stopped to enable them to come and attend. And they got on the caravan, and the caravan is moving on. That is what is happening.
First supplementary question will be asked by the Honourable Modise Mpaya.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Honourable President, as the African National Congress, we are encouraged and confident that the hosting of G20 brings global attention and will help attract foreign direct investment and will create opportunities in various sectors, as we have expressed. However, a lot of our people are uncertain and are asking the questions of how will the G20, as hosted by South Africa in 2025, benefit an ordinary persons on the streets, as well as help improve our economy and ensure that some of the opportunities created can be sustainable even beyond the event.
The Honourable President.
Thank you, Honourable Deputy Speaker. And of course, as we hold these big manifestations, everyone wants to see of what benefit is this going to be to us, and particularly at the individual level. The benefits are not something that will eventuate immediately. What this does do, though, particularly when it comes to the themes that we have identified and the priorities, these are processes that will finally turn the wheel of development to start getting the world to address all these issues. The G20 is an agglomeration of some of the big economy countries in the world. They account for a massive GDP number, and just to get them to come together to agree that they will agree on the reform of the financial institutions like the World Bank, the IMF, and also to agree on continuing forward with multilateralism so that we do not have a unipolar world, that we have a multipolar world, and where, for instance, on the outcomes that we want to see in terms of financing renewable energy, or climate change rather, and how, for instance, we would like disasters to be properly financed. This for us is an important ambition as we face, as I said earlier, recurring disasters. So in time, the people who live on the Eastern Seaboard, in KZN, the Eastern Cape, the Southern Cape, who continue to suffer from climate change damage. We're hoping that through the decisions that will be taken, we'll then be able to get finance that is going to assist us with rebuilding. And obviously, we're also doing this for our own continent, for countries in the global south, but more particularly for Africa, that in the end there should be agreement on how countries that are suffering from a high debt burden can get cheaper loans to address their own developmental agendas. Now, all these matters do take time, as many others that have been decided by the G20 do take time. For instance, in Brazil, the decision was taken to target the 3,000 richest people in the world and to levy a tax on them. Now that was agreed, and that work is now underway. It will admittedly take some time before it is finally put into place. But in the end, the taxation of those people will lead to higher taxes for the countries where they live, and in the end, it will result in development finance being present. So we, as South Africa, being positioned as a country that is hosting the G20 for the first time, we should be pleased that it positions our country as a very important country from an influence point of view, because we are up there with the many other nations and we're able to influence decisions that will be taken by various multilateral organizations in the world. And as it is now, because we are G20 president, our views, our opinions are sought, and our word is heeded and listened to. So these are some of the key benefits that position our country at the top level of countries that operate in the world. And more so for us, it was more to focus on Africa and to focus on the global south, which has broadly been accepted. And also to focus on the Africa Continental Free Trade Area and to convince the various countries that are part of the G20 that South Africa remains the gateway into the rest of the African continent, where if they want to set up operations, we are an investable destination. So from an investment point of view, it also showcases our country. It gives us an opportunity to talk about South Africa. And in fact, in all the meetings that have been held, all our ministers and our deputy ministers have done nothing but to showcase South Africa. And as we have held these meetings, we've taken them to places that showcase our country as well. And that has brought tourism in and will also bring future tourism. So the benefits can be multiplied in many ways. To say this will be the one thing that everyone will benefit from would be false on my part, but it's general benefit, and it's a good opportunity that we have. It's an opportunity that may only befall us or come to us possibly 20 years again from now. So we need to make good use of this opportunity that we have, being the first African country to be a G20 president and being in a very good position, having inherited the position from Brazil, a global south country, and handing over to the United States, a northern country which is a superpower and the biggest economy in the world. So we are well positioned, and I do believe that that gives us clout, that gives us an opportunity to be able to mobilize a number of things that can benefit our country. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
The second supplementary question will be asked by the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg leave to remain seated. Mr. President, don't you find it strategic and indeed necessary to influence the G20 to dissect this undesirable attitude of the United States against some countries in the world? Consequently, are there any plans in place by South Africa to influence the G20 summit to put on the agenda the current regressive attitude by the United States against South Africa and other progressive countries? If not, don't you think South Africa must just focus rather on cementing economic ties with BRICS countries and other progressive countries in the global south and excuse itself from global bodies in which the US is part of the main driving force? I thank you.
The Honourable President.
Thank you, Honourable Deputy Speaker. South Africa continues to participate in a multitude of multilateral organizations. And in doing so, we always insist that a multipolar world is much more advantageous than a unipolar world, where the might of one country means right, means that they can dominate other countries. And we participate because we do always advocate the interests of our continent, and of course the interests of our own country and continent and the global south. And we are highly respected around the world for doing precisely that. And even as we participate in meetings, for instance, of the G7, where we are invited for their outreach program, we always articulate the views of the African continent and the global south. And being a member of the G20, we are able to do so as being a rightful member, and our voice is heard. And of course, you will know that as part of all this, we are members of BRICS, and some members of the G20 are also in BRICS, such as India, Brazil, and China. They are members of BRICS, and in BRICS, we are a collection of fairly progressive countries that have a particular set of values that bring us together. And just yesterday, as I said, we held a BRICS summit in which all the leaders of the BRICS family participated and took decisions that are aimed at consolidating what we have and leading us to even improving the manner in which we trade, the manner in which we respond to challenges, and how we should strengthen the multilateral system. All of us, as one, spoke about how we strengthen the United Nations and how we strengthen the World Trade Organization, the World Health Organization. Now, these organizations are organizations that many other countries participate in, including the United States. And we then take decisions to be the voices of reason, the voices of progressiveness, notwithstanding that they also participate. And we have the view that we cannot extract ourselves from those types of organizations by virtue of the fact that the US participates. We should participate and be able to exchange views and exchange opinions with them. And obviously with the hope that our views will win the day, because they're based on good values, they're based on progressive principles. But to answer your questions more directly, yes, we are strengthening BRICS, and we are relying on BRICS to be the country, to be the organization that will consolidate our own standing and our own values. BRICS already, from a population point of view, is already half of the world population and accounts for between 30 to 40% of world trade. And that basically means that it's a very strong collection of countries that in time will continue to have a strong influence in what happens, not only in the G20, but also in the world. And in the G20 process, we've got a good number of countries that are very progressive, that see eye to eye with what we believe in. And we will be able to keep on pushing that agenda, because our agenda is aimed at advancing the interests of humanity and making sure that ordinary people lead a better life. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
The third supplementary question will be asked by the Honourable Khadebe.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Your Excellency,
I would like to know what legacy projects or initiatives are being developed as part of South Africa's G20 presidency to ensure lasting developmental impact beyond 2025. Thank you.
The Honourable President.
Thank you, Honourable Deputy Speaker. We have a number of projects that are being worked on that will see full fruition when we get to the Leaders' Summit. We are, through the various departments that we have in government, have been looking very closely at certain projects, and some of which will, the temptation is always you go for a legacy project at the region where the Leaders' Summit is going to be, like we've seen in many other parts of the world. But we want it to be a much more broad-based type of legacy projects that will, our people will then be able to say, this is what we had the G20, and this is what has been left behind. So a number of such projects are now in the works, and some of them are reaching a level of fruition, and we will be able to talk about them in time. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
The last supplementary question will be asked by the Honourable Ghana.
All the best tonight against Nigeria. So we are playing Nigeria. Namonhla, President. President, so lekaya lel fare zani. Barno loko hi amukela vayeni. Kuna mafulufulu kutirhiwa vusiku na nhlikani. Mara endzhaka loko vayeni va fambile, we go back to the default settings. So at the moment, when you drive through the G20 route, there's so much work that's happening. But I know, as we have seen with the World Cup, that after the hosting of the G20, we go back to the default setting. Se va ri nimbutisa leswi President, ku ri mi ta endla njhani ku ri matirhelo lama, magingirikelo lama, hi ma vonaka nkarhi wa sweswi, ya ya mahlweni after G20, not this thing coming to an end, all this 24-hour work coming to an end because now the visitors have left our country.
The Honourable President.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. No, na cancer sunen ni na ilava kuri bafana ba wina nyamutla ba tlanga na tiko leri ri tikaku, and Nigeria itshama bonisa xipuku, so ilava ku va bonisa xipuku namuntlha, so ni khense ngopfu. No, uvulantiso hi ku minkarhi yo tala loko ku ta vayeni na le makaya swi endleka tani, loko tiva ku ri ku ta muyeni a nga va mukhwenyana, a nga va president, a nga va member of parliament, loko a fika swakudya a ku dyiwa swakudya swo swa kahle swinene, na jareti ta cleaniwa kahle, na timbyana ti ta bohiwa ku ri ti nga vonaki. It's natural, swi endleka tani all over. And when visitors come, we spruce up, we clean up, but when visitors are gone, we revert back to our usual practices. You are absolutely right. And there are concerns also about precisely that in areas where these meetings are happening. But what I have seen is that where we've held some of the meetings, people cleaned up, people put everything right, and they've continued even post the meeting because they use that as an incentive to get better. And I'm hoping that where we are going to have, for instance, the Leaders' Summit in Johannesburg, and we've been putting a lot of pressure on Johannesburg itself, that Johannesburg must must pick itself up from what it is. And it should not only be because the Leaders' Summit is coming to Johannesburg. It must be because it should be done. I took time to talk to the mayor and explain to him that one time as I was traveling around, I saw how even the driveways, even the roads were really in a terrible and sorry state, with weeds along the path and with the rails having been damaged, and paper all over and dirt. And I painted that picture to the mayor and I said, this must end. We must deliver a better looking Johannesburg, and it must not only be done for the G20, it must be done beyond the G20. So he sat there and listened. And he said, Mr. President, I want you to come and measure us in a month's time. So that's precisely what I'm going to do. So we're going to see whether Johannesburg gets better. But the point that you made, nisitwe kahle, ita endla ku ri vanhu va endla sure ku ri loko vavhaki va fambile, swilo swi tshama swi sasekile ku ya mahlweni. So ita endla tani. Swi saseka ku fana na wena hi ku saseke swinene.
We now move on to question number 17, which has been asked by the Honourable Trollip. Order, members. The question is whether the Cabinet intends to approve a constitutional amendment bill to abolish the position of Deputy Ministers, given the amount of money spent on salaries, travel and VIP protection, and if not, whether the position of Deputy Ministers will be retained as a means of patronage that takes high priority over the needs of the unemployed, hungry and hopeless. The Honourable President.
Thank you, Honourable Deputy Speaker. Since the advent of our democracy in 1994, Deputy Ministers have played an important role in assisting ministers in the performance of their functions and responsibilities. The Constitution provides for the appointment of Deputy Minister to assist the members of the Executive. According to the Constitution, Deputy Ministers are accountable to Parliament for the exercise of their powers and the performance of their functions. Ministers and their respective Deputy Ministers agree on the delegation of responsibility in certain areas of work in terms of departmentals' annual performance plans, ensuring that there is consistent political attention and oversight. In announcing appointments to the National Executive following the May elections last year, I indicated that due to the need to ensure that the National Executive is inclusive of all parties that are part of the GNU, it was not possible to reduce the number of portfolios, for instance, in the executive. We have sought to ensure that the National Executive is representative of the people of South Africa, giving due consideration to gender, youth, demographics, and regional distribution. Deputy Ministers appointed in June last year continue to add value to the work of the government and to support the meaningful way the implementation of the priorities of the 7th administration. Now, yes, we are always concerned about the size of the executive, as we are also concerned about the size of deputy ministers. You may recall that right at the beginning when we constituted this government, we did address this issue and said that my own wish was that we should have a much smaller executive. That has always been my declared wish, but the need to accommodate various parties that are part of the GNU. That are part of the GNU resulted in us having the size of the executive that we have now. All my colleagues in the GNU accepted that, yes, it would have been ideal to have a much smaller executive. However, the need to have a GNU which is properly representative meant that we needed to have the type of architecture that we have. Now, it is an architecture which I believe works. I have seen how the various ministers and deputy ministers go about executing their tasks, and it is what we have, and we need to keep the government moving forward with the type of architecture that we have right now. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.